Hey everyone, so again, welcome to Psychology 200. This is week 2. We've made it through week 1. Week 1, you had to solely just read chapter 1 and partake in a discussion board. That discussion board was really there to get you to start thinking about a research question. And this week, we're going into really we're going to learn how to get started in research. So this week specifically, just to get some housekeeping things out of the way, this week you have to read chapter 2, obviously watch the lecture, and then we also have a quiz due on Friday at 11:59 p.m. So make sure that gets done. I will just send out a general warning about quizzes in my classroom. Quizzes are due on the day of. You do have access to the quiz right now. So the week that you're seeing this, Monday, you have access to the quiz right now. I will warn you though, do not take the quiz without reading. You're not going to do well. Remember, this semester, I only dropped one of the lowest, okay? So, yeah, make sure you read before you even attempt that quiz. There's only one shot at every single quiz. So do not think that you can get away without reading chapter 1, okay? Chapter 2. So again, read chapter 2, do the chapter 2 quiz. The quiz is specifically due on Friday at 11:59 p.m., but you have access to it right now. Good. So as usual, I am going to share my screen with you guys. And we're going to get started with chapter 2. Chapter 2 is entitled Getting Started in Research. Specifically in this chapter, our authors are focused on research ideas and then turning those research ideas into research questions that are empirically testable and also interesting. And we also will learn how to review the research literature. Okay. However, our authors are actually going to begin with some more basic concepts and then end with some more important general issues that we have in research design. Okay. Now, the beginning of the chapter, your authors start off with an example on human figure drawings. Don't just glance over that, but there is a reason as to why our authors start that section off with human figure drawings, HFDs, okay? And that reason is to really get us to be able to identify research questions, okay? So I want to start this lecture off with that blurb, okay? So I'm going to read it out loud to you guys. Human figure drawings are commonly used by professionals who interview children about suspected sexual abuse. It's assumed that these drawings will decrease children's linguistic and emotional or motivational limitations, as well as memory problems, and thus will result in the elicitation of more complete and accurate details of abuse. There is, however, little scientific information to support claims of their benefits. This article presents the results of 2 studies that examined young children's abilities to use HFDs to report body touches. Now, this article was taken from the Journal of Experimental Psychology. It is from an actual article. However, in that piece that I just read, you should have been able to, and I'm hoping that you actually pause this video, but you should be able to identify the research question. I'll give you a few seconds. And if you need more than that, you can pause the video, okay? So what is the research question in that blurb? After you've read it on your own, I might not be the clearest, but after you've read it on your own, what is the identifiable research question? you should immediately see that what the authors are trying to get you to see or to understand or to figure out as to what their research is that what they're about to study or what they're about to look at in that HFDS paper that they're writing is about the effects of using human figure drawings on the accuracy of children's memories of being touched. Okay, once again, the identified research question in that blurb is about the effect of human figure drawings on the accuracy of children's memories of being touched. Now, this is very, very important because your research questions need to be as clear as that. I need to pick up your proposals at the end of the semester, and not just at the end of the semester. In a week or two, when you have your research questions due, I need to be able to pick up, like I need to be able to understand what you're going to research, okay? Oh, Sarah is researching da-da-da-da. John is researching da-da-da. Alexis is looking at this. Jamil is looking at that. Good? Okay? So let's move on, right? Let's go into the chapter. Okay? Your chapter obviously is going to go over learning objectives. I'm not rushing through these learning objectives because they're not important. They are. I want you to be able to read the chapter, go back to these learning objectives, and make sure that you are understanding them. The learning objectives for the week, however, that I want you to get out of, the entire week, out of doing the quiz, out of reading after looking at the lecture, are listed on Blackboard, okay? However, make sure you kind of quiz yourself with these learning objectives. Make sure you know these things by the end of the week, okay? So the first section of chapter 2 begins with some basic concepts. So we're introduced to several basic concepts that allow us to think and communicate more like researchers in psychology. Obviously, the goal is to understand the structure of research questions in psychology. Research questions in psychology are about variables, okay? Now, what are variables? Variables are a quantity or quality that varies across individuals, okay? So they're quantity or quality that vary across people. The level of a variable is the level of a variable is the possible values that it can take on. Now, a variable in our textbook, our authors look at two types, right? There are more. But the two types that our authors look at are quantitative variables and categorical variables, okay? So a quantitative variable is a quantity like height, okay? That is typically measured by assigning a number to each individual, okay? So for example, people's level of talkativeness is an example of a quantitative variable. One that might be a little clearer to you is maybe a quantitative variable like the amount of siblings you have in your family. That's a quantitative variable. Good. The other type that we're introduced to in chapter 2 is a categorical variable. Okay, a categorical variable is a quality that varies across individuals. It's a quantity that is typically measured by assigning a category label to each individual. So an example or a couple of examples of categorical variables could be a group of people's nationality, their race, their occupation, their sex, biological sex, their marital status, okay? Get it? Okay. Researchers in psychology are usually interested in drawing conclusions about some very large groups of people. These large groups of people we know as, or we define them as, populations. Okay? It's important, though, to understand that, researchers in psychology, not just in psychology, like, we can't measure and we can't gather data from every single person in a population. Okay? So we usually only study a small subset of a sample of a population. Okay? So again, we only usually typically study a small subset of a population. This is known as a sample. So it's important, therefore, that researchers use a representative sample. So one that's similar to the population in specifically important respects, okay? So quickly, I want to give you an example if I were going to do a study off the top of my head. So I want to look at how well psychology 200 students, so students who are taking research methods for the behavioral sciences, are doing in their classes around the US. Now, it's impossible for me to gather every single data from every single student taking a research methods class in the United States. And we kind of know the reasons why, right? People need to be, one, willing to participate, available, etc. There's so many issues, right? However, I can gather a sample size. I work here at NECC, okay? So I can gather a sample size. However, I do also need to make sure that the sample size is representative of college students taking research methods around the United States, specifically in important respects. Maybe some of those important respects might be the gender composition of the classes, the racial makeup of the classes, the types of faculty teaching those students in those classes, etc. Okay, so it's doable. Okay, so one method of obtaining samples, right, a sample size, is through what we know as, or what we call, random sampling. So random sampling is a type of sampling in which every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected for the sample. This is not to be confused with convenience sampling, which is a type of sampling that consists of individuals who happen to be nearby and also willing to participate in your research. Okay? However, there are some obvious problems with specifically convenience sampling. The obvious problem with convenience sampling is that the sample might not come out as a representative sample. And I want you guys to actually think about that. Not that I'll discuss it on here, and not that it's like some kind of taboo thing to discuss, but think about why that random sample, right, or why that convenience sampling might not come out representative. Okay, look at me, imagine the example I was just giving you about research methods courses, okay? And I'm the one who's looking for participants. And imagine somebody else who's a researcher, who might be male, who might be white, who is looking at the same subject I am, okay? Could our, again, convenience sampling, could they come out different based on who's more comfortable interviewing with me or with him? Okay, but again, think about that. Okay, once the sample has been selected, Researchers need to measure the variables they are interested in, okay? This requires an operational definition, which is a definition of the variable in terms of precisely how it is to be measured, okay? Most variables can be operationally defined in many different ways. When a variable has been measured for a particular individual, the result is called a score. And a set of many scores is then called data. So once you've gotten many scores, you're getting your data. Okay? This part of the section, obviously, I discussed. We're going into statistical relationships between variables. We're going to go into correlation and the difference between correlation and causation, and why we try very, very hard, why we do stay away from causation in psychology, in sociology, in the social sciences. And it is important. So I'm not getting rid of this section. I'm simply just moving it to our statistics chapter where it belongs. But it is up to you to review this on your own, okay? I'm not saying that there aren't going to be one or two questions on the quiz pertaining to this, okay? But I'm saying that the real, like, hardcore chunks in this section are pushed to the rear, okay? The rear in terms of later on in the semester, not the rear in terms of like, we're getting it out of here, okay? So right now, I'm just going to pause, and I'll be back, right back with the remainder of the section. Sound good? Okay, as promised, I've come right back. So we're jumping to section 2 of chapter 2. So again, let me share my screen to where I've begun, okay? So this section is actually going over how to generate good research questions, okay? Before you can conduct a good research, right? Before you can conduct good research, you need a good research question. Beginners, novices, find it difficult to come up with good research questions, okay? It is a creative process that can actually appear mysterious. It can actually appear overwhelming, stressful for a lot of us, okay? Especially like when we are brand new to it. Psychological research on creativity has shown that it is largely the product of ordinary thinking strategies, hard work, and persistence that help get that research question created, okay? Again, this section, we're going to be discussing some of the common sources of research ideas that generate research ideas using those sources. We're also going to describe some techniques for turning research ideas into empirical research questions and use those techniques to generate research questions. And we're also going to be able to explain what it takes to make a research question interesting and evaluate research questions in terms of their interestingness, okay? So simple strategies for finding general research ideas is obviously what this chapter or this section is about. We're going to be turning those ideas into empirically testable research questions, and finally evaluating those questions in terms of how interesting they are. Research questions often begin as more general research ideas, usually focusing on some behavior or psychological characteristic, okay? There are, though, some common sources of information that psychology students like yourself can gather inspiration and ideas from to create these research questions. The three most common are informal observations, practical problems, and also previous research that others have done to create your own research questions, okay? Informal observations include direct observations of our own and others' behavior, as well as secondhand observations from non-scientific sources. Non-scientific sources like books, like newspapers, like articles, like the television, like media, okay? We can also gather inspiration from practical problems, right? Practical problems can also inspire research ideas, leading directly to applied research in domains like law, health, education, sports, and many others, okay? The last area, and it's not like the last, but another area that our book discusses is previous research and how we can gather inspiration and maybe even our own types of research questions through previous research. Previous research is like a kind of large-scale collaboration in which many different researchers read and evaluate each other's work and conduct new studies to build on that previous work, okay? Once you have a research idea, you need to use it to generate one or more empirically testable research questions, okay? This means that a question, this obviously is going to mean a question expressed in terms of a single variable or relationship between variables. The last major sections of specifically research articles in psychology, in which the researcher summarizes their results, interprets them in the context of past research, and will suggest directions from new research. This area and these suggestions in these last sections of psychology research papers are often a place where those authors are making and giving specific research questions. So sometimes authors will honestly be like, we did not look and we did not find this, and this. It's an area that needs to be explored. That is your research question. That is your potential research question. Okay, and honestly, that goes back to the places of inspiration, right? Previous research is where you can grab research questions, okay? So these suggestions often take the form of specific research questions. To generate your own research questions, there are a couple of things that you need to do. First, if you have a particular behavior or psychological characteristic in mind, you can simply conceptualize it as a variable and ask how frequent or intense it is. That could turn into your research question, okay? If scientific research has already answered the question of how frequent or intense the behavior or characteristic is, then you should consider turning it into a question about a statistical relationship between the behavior or the characteristic and some other variable. So pop another variable in there and see what you think about it. It could turn into another question, okay? What if you find that it has already been scientifically studied or studied scientifically? The fact that a question has been studied scientifically and the research published suggests that it is of interest to the scientific community doesn't necessarily mean it's over, okay? For another, the question can almost certainly be refined, could be tuned up, tweaked, okay? So that its answer will still contribute something new to the research, okay? And I went through all these, I talked faster than I was clicking the slides. Sorry for that, okay? Okay, so whether a research question is interesting to us, so there are a couple of things that can be of issue, right? Whether or not a research question is interesting to us and whether or not it's interesting enough to be studied. You need to be aware of those things, right? So whether a research question is interesting to us personally, but whether it is interesting to people more generally, especially to the scientific community, again, you need to be aware of. 3 factors that affect the interestingness of research questions are as follows, right? First, a research question is interesting to the extent that its answer is in doubt. Okay, there has to be some reasonable chance that the answer to those questions will be something that we did not already know. That will make it interesting. Okay, the second factor is whether answering it will fill in a gap in the research literature. Does it fill something? Does it fill holes in? Okay, that makes it interesting. Third is whether its answer has important practical implications. Can it affect, a segment of society? Can it be used for policy, law, and change, etc.? That will also make it interesting. Okay. Also, and I do think I have a slide on feasibility, but feasibility is another important criterion used to evaluate research questions. Feasibility is the extent to which research questions can be answered with available resources. Okay, we are winding down the lecture right now. We're getting towards the end. The last section that our book goes over is reviewing the research literature. This is going to be a really critical part of your research proposals. It is the most time consuming. I'm not going to say that it is the hardest. It is the most time consuming because once you learn how to review one piece, you can review them all. Okay? So in this section, our authors define the research literature in psychology and give examples of sources that are part of the the literature and sources that are not. And our authors describe and use several methods for finding previous research on a particular research idea and research question. So once you guys figure out your research questions, I want you to see whether or not you can find some literature surrounding your research question. Okay. So reviewing the research literature means finding, reading, and summarizing the published research relevant to your research question. An APA-style empirical research report always includes a written literature review. Okay. Although you are not conducting a full-scale research paper in this class, it's just a proposal, so you're proposing a project, right? You are still going to write a literature review because it is critical as psychology majors, as anyone who's going into the sociology fields or the social work field or the social psychology field. You will have to do this eventually, so why not learn it now? Okay. So it's important to review the literature early in the research process for several different reasons, okay? One reason to review the literature is that it can help you turn research ideas into interesting research questions, okay? It can tell you if a research question has already been answered. It can help you evaluate the interestingness of a research question. It can give you ideas as to how to conduct your own study. And it can tell you how your study fits into the research literature. Okay. The research literature in any field is all the published research in that field. The research literature definitely does not include self-help and other pop psychology books, dictionaries, encyclopedia entries, websites, and similar sources that are intended mainly for the general public. That is not the stuff that we include in our research literature. Research literature really consists of two types of sources in psychology, okay? Empirical research, professional journals, which include empirical research reports, reviews, theoretical articles, but also scholarly books, okay? And we're gonna go over the professional journals first, okay? So professional journals are periodicals that are published original works and articles. They are usually published monthly or quarterly, sometimes even yearly, and organized into volumes and are published in both hard copy and electronic formats. Articles in professional journals are one of two basic types: empirical or review articles. Okay, empirical research reports describe one or more, or many, new empirical studies conducted by the authors. They introduce a research question, explain why it's interesting, review previous research, and describe their method and results and draw their conclusions. So these are original pieces of work. Review articles, on the other hand, summarize previously published research on a topic and usually present new ways to organize and explain the results. When a review article is devoted primarily to presenting a new theory, it is often referred to as a theoretical article. Professional journals in psychology undergo a process of peer review. Researchers submit a manuscript to the editor, who is generally an established researcher, who in turn sends it to 3 experts on that specific topic. Each reviewer reads the manuscript, writes a critical review, okay, and sends the review back to the editor along with his or her recommendations. The editor then has the right to decide whether to accept the article or drop it, or ask them to resubmit it, okay? Now, the second type of professional journals that we and you will be using in your literature review, the literature review section of your proposal, could be scholarly books, okay? And I don't have a slide on it, but scholarly books, okay? Scholarly books are books written by researchers and practitioners, mainly for and used by other researchers and practitioners. They can be written by a single author or a small group of authors, and usually gives a coherent presentation of a topic, much like an extended review article. They can also have an editor or a small group of editors who recruit many others to write separate chapters on different aspects of the same topic. In general, scholarly books undergo peer review process similar to that of a professional journal. The primary method used to search research, and this is what I do want you guys to use while you're here at NECC, specifically since everything is online, you have access to the library database, okay? The primary method, as I was saying, used to search for research literature involves using one or more electronic databases, okay? PsycInfo is the one that we use here at NECC, okay? The most important for our purposes, obviously, is PsycInfo, which is produced by the American Psychological Association. So that's where a lot of you are going to find your research info, okay? PsycInfo consists of individual records for each article, book chapter, or book in the database, okay? You guys can read more into that, but again, most of you should know how to use PsycInfo, okay? In addition to entering search terms into PsycInfo and other databases, there are several other techniques you can use to research literature. Okay, you can use Google Scholar. That's a popular one as well. Okay, if you have one good book or one really good article, you can look through the reference section and also figure out what that author or those authors were using. Those could become potential sources. You can start with a classic article or a book chapter on your topic and find its record in PsycInfo. Okay. You can also do a general internet search. There's no harm in doing that. Okay, as long as it is related to your topic or your name, the name of your researcher, etc., you can find some good information. Okay. When you do a literature review, you want to focus on sources that help you do these 4 basic things, I will say. Refine your research question, identify appropriate methods, place your research in the context of previous research, and write an effective research report. Several principles can help you find the most useful sources. The first is to focus on recent research within the last 10 years. The second, you should look for review articles on your topic because they will provide a useful overview of it, often discussing important information such as definitions, results, theories, trends, and controversies. Okay. Finally, you should look into sources that provide information that can help you argue the interestingness of your research question. Okay. And then research design. Okay. So when it comes to research design, and again, this section, actually, there is a section for it, and we are going to move it there. So I'm going to actually end the lecture here. Okay, research design, there is a specific chapter dedicated to that with internal validity, feasibility, etc. Sound good? So there it is. Okay, so any questions? I do have office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. and I will drop the Zoom code in our Blackboard. Have a great day, guys. Have a great week. Again, please do not hesitate to hit me up.